I found a portrait my family never took. Then reality started to collapse. Reddit stories. They say every family hides a portrait, not always of oil and canvas, but sometimes in secrets, buried beneath smiles and forced traditions. Before I unravel what happened to mine, you need to understand the illusion we maintained. Perfect on the surface, but as brittle as old glass. Our family was the kind that sent out matching Christmas cards, where everyone wore the same red flannel and smiled like they weren't dying inside. My mother baked pies no one ate. My father mowed a lawn he never walked on, and my sister and I performed in the great theater of happy families until the curtain finally collapsed. But I get ahead of myself. This all began in a house that looked like a dream and whispered like a curse. We moved into that house when I was 11. It had 6 bedrooms, each colder than the last, and a hallway that echoed like a cathedral. My parents called it a fresh start, a new chapter after years of tension too subtle to name. They claimed things would be different here, and for a brief, dishonest while, they were. The air felt lighter, like the weight of past grudges had been left behind with our old mailbox. But even clean slates carry fingerprints. My father became obsessed with order. Every shoe had a place, every light switch had a rule. My mother, once loud with laughter, began whispering to herself while watering plastic plants. And my sister, Helen, who used to pull me into dance routines in the kitchen, started staying in her room with the door locked, listening to music so loud I could feel it through the walls. I pretended not to notice. Pretending was our unofficial family motto. One afternoon, while exploring the attic, a space we were technically not allowed in, I found a box labeled Our Best Memories. Inside were photo albums, home videos, and a painting I had never seen before. It was a family portrait, but not of us as we were now. In it, my mother looked radiant, not exhausted. My father smiled without clenching his jaw. Helen was laughing with her mouth open, and the boy in the painting, me presumably, had eyes brighter than I remembered ever feeling. The strange thing was, none of us remembered posing for it. I brought it downstairs, curious and proud of my find. My mother dropped the pie she was carrying when she saw it. My father didn't speak for 3 days. Helen accused me of digging up things better left buried. That night, the painting vanished from where I'd left it in the living room. My parents denied ever seeing it. Helen wouldn't even acknowledge the conversation. And just like that, the portrait disappeared from our lives, but not from my mind. I started dreaming about it. In the dreams, I'd be standing in front of the painting, only it wasn't hanging on a wall. It hovered in mid-air, glowing softly, whispering things I couldn't understand. I'd wake up with my heart pounding and my sheets damp with sweat. Sometimes I thought I heard footsteps outside my room at night. Other times, I'd find objects slightly moved in the morning. My toothbrush would be on the wrong side of the sink. Books I hadn't touched were open on my desk. I convinced myself it was nothing. But doubt, once planted, grows fast in silence. That year, Helen changed schools. My parents said it was for a better curriculum, but I saw the note she wrote in her journal before tearing it out and burning it in the fireplace. It said, "They know. They all know, and they keep smiling." I didn't ask her about it. She wouldn't have answered. By then, she'd become a shadow version of herself, eating quietly, smiling when spoken to, but with eyes that had learned to lie. I started collecting moments like that, tiny fractures in the family image, my mother's sudden crying fits when no one was around, my father's habit of staring at the hallway mirror for hours, the way the family dog refused to enter the guest room. We never had guests. One weekend, I decided to find the painting again. I searched the entire attic, every closet, under every bed. Nothing, but when I checked the basement, a place I rarely went, I found something else. There was a wooden crate hidden behind old furniture, nailed shut. I pried it open with a hammer. Inside were dozens of old family portraits, not just one. Each was slightly different. In one, Helen was missing. In another, my mother had no eyes. In the most recent one, I wasn't in it at all. My blood turned cold. These weren't just paintings. They were records, versions, iterations of our family, edited like drafts of a story someone was desperate to get right. I didn't tell anyone what I saw. Instead, I began watching more closely. I recorded our dinner conversations, noting how often we repeated ourselves, how scripted everything sounded. I kept a journal of who said what and when. The patterns became undeniable. We were stuck in a loop. Each week felt like a reenactment of the last, with slight differences. Someone wearing a different shirt, a new meal that nobody finished, an argument that began but never escalated. It was as if something, or someone, was rehearsing us. Then came the day I woke up and Helen was gone. My parents said she'd gone on a trip with school, but her room was emptied out. No clothes, no posters, no shoes. Just a mattress and bare walls. When I demanded answers, my mother smiled too long and said, "Don't worry, sweetheart. You'll understand when you're older." My father didn't even acknowledge the question. I searched the house again, more desperately this time. I found nothing, except a new portrait in the basement. This one had no Helen, but I was back in it, older than before. My mother's face was twisted into a grin that looked more like a grimace. My father's eyes were completely black. I started to cry. That night, I tried to run away. I packed a bag, wrote a note, and waited until after midnight. But when I stepped outside, the neighborhood was gone. I mean gone. Not dark or quiet. Literally vanished. In its place was a swirling mist that seemed to breathe. I turned around and the house was glowing faintly, like the portrait had in my dreams. I went back in, dazed, terrified. My parents were standing in the hallway, side by side, holding hands, smiling like mannequins. "Here you are," my mother said. "We have been waiting to finish the painting." And that's when I realized something was terribly wrong. Not just with them, but with all of us. The family I knew had never existed, not in the way I remembered. The portrait I found wasn't a memory, it was a blueprint, a template. And someone, or something, was using it to build the perfect family. Again and again, each time adjusting, each time removing the parts that didn't fit. I wasn't just living in a home. I was living inside a design, a test, a cycle. And the worst part, I didn't know how many versions of me had already failed. The next morning, I awoke in my bed as if nothing had happened. My room was exactly as it had been before. Messy shelves, clothes on the floor, the same old posters curling at the corners. Helen's laughter echoed faintly down the hall, as if she were still there. For a fleeting moment, I believed maybe it had all been a nightmare. Maybe the mist, the empty neighborhood, the box of shifting portraits. Maybe my mind had finally cracked under the pressure of our artificial happiness. But then I saw it, a new family photo, framed and polished, hanging on the hallway wall where nothing had hung before. My stomach churned. In this one, Helen was smiling wide, but I noticed her eyes weren't looking at the camera. They were looking at me. I tried to play normal. Sat through breakfast, smiled when my mother asked how I slept, laughed politely when my father made one of his awkward jokes. But the laughter was thinner than the eggshell tension beneath it. I watched their faces closely. Too closely. The way their eyes didn't blink enough. The way they moved in perfect rhythm, never interrupting each other, never forgetting a name or story. It was like they were operating from a script, but one I'd never seen before. I decided I needed proof, something real to hold on to, something I could document before my memories faded or changed again. I skipped school that day, told my mother I wasn't feeling well, and to my surprise, she didn't argue. She simply touched my forehead, nodded serenely, and handed me a glass of water. "You'll feel better soon," she said. But the way she said it didn't sound like comfort. It sounded like a sentence. I waited until the house was quiet, then went to the basement. The crate was still there, but this time it was locked with a padlock that hadn't been there before. I felt my pulse quicken. I searched for the hammer I'd used before, but it was gone. The tools were gone. In fact, the entire shelf that had held them was missing, as if the house had decided to reorganize itself overnight. Desperate, I tried prying the crate open with a metal pipe I found behind the water heater. It barely budged. But then I noticed something new. Etched into the side of the crate were numbers. Coordinates, maybe, or a code. I copied them down 37,4220 and 122.841. I didn't have access to a GPS, so I snuck into my father's office to use the old laptop he kept hidden behind the bookshelf. It was password protected, but I knew his habits well enough to guess it. Family First 2020. The desktop opened with a soft chime and displayed a single folder titled Framework. I opened it. Inside were dozens of files named with dates and numbers. One was labeled with yesterday's date. Another with the date we moved into the house. I clicked it. What I saw made my blood freeze. Each file contained surveillance footage. Our entire lives recorded from angles I'd never noticed. Tiny cameras embedded in the walls, the ceilings, even the mirrors. Some feeds were from my room, showing me sleeping, brushing my teeth, changing clothes. I wanted to scream, but instead I kept watching. I needed to know how far it went. One file, marked Cycli Zoter 7 TRM and Deed, showed Helen, my sister, screaming in the middle of the night while my parents stood outside her door, motionless. She sobbed, begged for answers, said something about the others, and they're watching us. Then static. The next file was marked Cycla Enter 80 Izid. In this one, Helen was quiet, obedient, a perfect daughter, just like she had been until she disappeared. My stomach lurched. This wasn't surveillance. This was observation, experimentation. We weren't a family. We were a trial run. The computer started to flicker. I panicked, unplugged it, and returned it to the shelf just before I heard footsteps coming down the hallway. My father's voice called out, "Everything okay in there?" I quickly ducked out of the office and replied, "Just grabbing a book." My voice cracked slightly. He paused, then replied with a tone so calm it was chilling, "You know the rules about closed doors, son." Then he walked away. I spent the rest of the day pretending to nap, heart racing, mind unraveling. When night fell, I packed a bag again. I wasn't going to run, not this time. I was going to find out what those coordinates meant. I waited until 2 a.m. when the house was silent and slipped out through the garage. I expected the mist to be waiting for me, but it wasn't. The neighborhood looked real. Cars were parked where I remembered, lights on in some windows. But as I walked, I noticed something strange. Every house was the same model, the same shutters, the same porch lights. Only slight variations in color. No people outside, no barking dogs, no breeze, just stillness. I found a ride-share app still functioning on my phone and plugged in the coordinates. They led me to an address 2 towns over, an office building that looked abandoned. The driver said nothing the entire ride, didn't look at me, didn't acknowledge my questions. When we arrived, he simply unlocked the doors and drove off the moment I stepped out. The building loomed like a forgotten monument. No signs, no lights. But the door was unlocked. Inside, everything smelled of dust and antiseptic. I found a map on the wall showing different rooms labeled observation, simulation, and deconstruction. I walked down the hallway, passing through rooms filled with monitors, each displaying homes identical to mine. Families identical to mine, but in different stages. In one, the mother was crying while the father held a scalpel. In another, the child was being restrained. In another, everything was on fire. I almost collapsed. Then I found the archive room. Rows of cabinets, folders, logs. I pulled one labeled Family Unit Zone 8 Revision 3. Inside were documents describing us, me, my preferences, my phobias, my reactions to stress stimuli. It referred to me as Subject K. Helen was Subject H, and my parents, if they were ever really that, were labeled controllers. The goal, to test resilience, emotional thresholds, attachment disintegration. My hands shook as I turned the pages. The last note said, Subject K shows signs of awareness. Proceed with integration reset. I heard a click behind me. Turned. A man in a white lab coat stood there, clipboard in hand, face blank. "You weren't supposed to see this," he said, like a machine reading a line. I bolted, crashing into file cabinets, sprinting down the hallway. I didn't stop until I burst through the front doors, choking on air, lungs on fire. There were no cars, no people, just an empty road stretching into nothing. I ran until morning, slept in a drainage pipe, ate from a vending machine outside a closed gas station. When I finally found someone, a truck driver fueling up, I begged him to take me anywhere. He eyed me warily but agreed. During the drive, I told him everything. He listened quietly. Then he looked at me and said, "You must wandered far, kid." That area's been deserted since '98. I laughed until I realized he wasn't joking. He pulled out an old map, showed me where I'd come from. It wasn't even on the current road grid, just a patch of forest. When I finally returned, weeks later, after living off bus stations and public libraries, I found my house again. But it was no longer mine, different family, different cars in the driveway. The windows had new curtains. A little girl rode a tricycle in the front yard. I rang the doorbell. A man opened. "Not my father." "A strain I help you?" he asked. I shook my head. "Wrong house," I mumbled. Later, in a public records office, I looked up my address. The lot had been listed as vacant for the last 17 years. No construction permits, no tax records, nothing. My name didn't exist in any school database, no birth certificate, no Helen. And yet some nights when I close my eyes, I still see that portrait. The perfect version of us, smiling like we don't know we're trapped. And I wonder, what if that wasn't the real family? What if I was never meant to escape? What if the version of me writing this isn't the original? Because the more I think about it, the more I suspect I didn't leave the simulation. I just walked into another one. And this one is better at pretending it's real. After weeks of bouncing between shelters, bus stops, and libraries, I ended up in a small coastal town that smelled of salt and moss. It was the kind of place where people still made eye contact and asked strangers if they were lost. I took up odd jobs, cleaning boats, washing dishes, organizing books in a dusty corner of a secondhand store. I told no one my real name. In truth, I wasn't sure I still had one. The memory of my family, my house, even my own voice felt like it belonged to someone else. Every time I tried to recall a moment with Helen, really remember her laugh, her face, I got a flash of static, like an old VHS tape worn thin in all the most important places. One evening, while sweeping up the bookshop, I found a book that hadn't been there before. It was wedged between two volumes on mythology, its cover unmarked, just a smooth, dark leather with no title. When I opened it, I stopped breathing. On the first page was a drawing, my old house drawn in charcoal, not a resemblance, my house, every window, every shingle. The front door with the chipped bottom corner. I turned the page. Another sketch, my room exactly as I left it. Then a sequence of portraits, each one of me but older, or younger, or smiling in ways I never did. The final image was of my family, but with a caption scribbled underneath in shaky handwriting, "This version forgot too soon. Try again?" My knees went weak. I sat on the floor, the broom clattering beside me. The shop owner, an old man named Ellison, noticed. "You all right, kid?" he asked. I shoved the book under my shirt and nodded. "Just dizzy. Low blood sugar." He waved me off, already turning back to the register. That night, I slept in a tent behind the marina. The air reeked of seaweed and diesel. I lit a candle and flipped through every page of the book. Hidden between the sketches were notes. Cryptic phrases like version 4.3 initiated with false grief protocol, and subject K's consciousness remains entangled with prototype memories. Cleansing ineffective. There were diagrams, too. Symbols etched like tattoos around the drawings of my face. A repeated phrase stood out, circled in red ink. Anchor fragments detected. I didn't know what it meant at the time, but something deep in my bones recognized the term. Anchor fragments. Remnants of truth. Pieces of something real in a sea of synthetic lies. After that night, I started seeing patterns again. Not like before. These weren't in the walls or behind mirrors. These were out here, in the real world. If this was the real world. I saw the same woman buying oranges at the corner stand 3 days in a row, wearing the same yellow scarf, laughing the same way at the same joke. A man walking his dog stopped at the exact same place every morning at 6:43 a.m. and checked his watch 3 times, as if on cue. These weren't just habits. These were loops. Scripts? Rehearsals bleeding into reality. That's when I met her. She came into the bookstore one afternoon while I was stocking shelves. She was older than me, maybe mid-20s, but her eyes looked ancient. She walked straight to me, didn't browse, didn't even pretend to shop. "Your name isn't Karen anymore, is it?" she said. My heart nearly stopped. I hadn't told anyone that name, not in weeks. "Who are you?" I whispered. She glanced around, then handed me a folded slip of paper. "We remember the same things," she said, then turned and left. On the paper was a single sentence. "If you're reading this, you're still in it, Ba." There was an address written beneath it. A storage facility just outside town. I went that night. The place was deserted. I found unit and AC and knocked 3 times like the note said. A soft click and the door opened. Inside was a crude command center. Monitors, wires, maps, piles of books. The woman stood at a folding table, holding a cracked tablet. "You're the only version that's made it this far without being reset," she said. "We call you the Memberer." She told me her name was Elia. She was from a different cycle, a failed one like mine. But she had escaped differently. Not by accident like I had, but by design. She had allowed herself to be deleted. But a piece of her, her anchor fragment, had attached itself to a corrupted backup, one the system had deemed too unstable to run. Somehow she emerged in this version, half present, half ghost, tethered to the code but no longer controlled by it. She pointed to a map covered in pins. "These are anchor sites, real places overwritten by simulations. Each pin is a fracture point, where something went wrong in the programming. Places people remember but can't find, places that don't show up on any digital map." One pin stood out, red thick, circled in ink. "That's your house," she said. "Or what's left of it." I asked her why I couldn't remember certain things. Helen's voice, my own age, what we used to fight about. "Because they scrub the data every time you resist. Your defiance triggers resets. But something in you keeps crawling back. Some part of you doesn't let go." She handed me a device, looked like an old cassette player. "This is a pulse anchor. It'll let you lock in your perception temporarily. Stop the loops, let you see what's really there." I held it like it might explode. "But you need to understand," she added. "If you use it too long, the system notices, and it adapts." The next week was a blur. Elia and I traveled to anchor sites. Abandoned schools with rooms still warm, towns with clocks that spun backwards, graveyards with headstones for people who were still alive. Each location gave me flashes of memory. Helen's face under a flickering streetlight. My father arguing with someone through a mirror. My mother writing letters she never mailed. I began remembering not just one life, but dozens. Lives where Helen was older, younger, missing. Lives where I wasn't me, but someone else entirely. In one, I was blind. In another, I spoke a language I didn't know now. All of them connected by the same constants: the house, the portrait, the reset. Then the dreams returned, not nightmares. At least, that's what Elia called them. Information dumps from the system trying to overwrite my brain. I'd wake up with knowledge I'd never learned: quantum architecture, mirror theory, neural redundancy schemas. But worst of all, I began to see the code. Not as numbers, but as patterns in people's behavior, in weather, in the way birds flew in exact circles above specific towns. I started losing track of what was real. My reflection blinked slower than I did. I heard my own voice speaking words I didn't think. And once, I saw Helen standing in a crowd of people in a train station, just for a second, before she turned to static and vanished. Elia told me I was nearing a convergence point, the moment when all my past versions would collapse into one timeline. "If you survive it," she said, "you'll remember everything. You'll become whole. But the system won't let that happen. It can't. Because then you'd be able to rewrite it." I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Me. rewrite a system that had outwitted me for years. But deep down, I knew she was right. I felt it. Like I had already done it before. Like I was looping not because I was weak, but because I was dangerous. Then the pulse anchor shorted out. We were in an abandoned chapel. Another anchor site. When it happened, I was scanning the stained glass for patterns when it sparked in my hand, burning a red line across my palm. I dropped it, and everything changed. The sky outside turned black. The chapel lights flickered and dimmed. Elia gasped. "It's noticed you," she whispered. "Run." But I didn't. I stood still, eyes wide, as the world began to peel like wallpaper. Behind the chapel walls were corridors, endless white corridors, screens embedded into the ceiling showing all my lives like film reels. In one, I was being born. In another, I was dying in a fire. And in every one, Helen was there. Watching, I stepped through the collapsing wall, into the corridor. My skin buzzed like static. I walked past the screens until I found the final one. It showed me, sitting at a desk, writing this down, looking over my shoulder, whispering to myself. And I finally understood. I was never meant to escape. I was meant to observe, to record, to pass it on to the next version. The one who might go further, do more, break the loop for good. So if you're reading this, maybe you're the one. Maybe you're the next remember. And maybe this time, the system won't be ready. They say trauma lives in the body, not the mind. But what if the trauma is the body? What if your skin remembers the things you're programmed to forget? That's what I kept asking myself as I wandered the white corridors, unsure of what was real, who I was, or how long I had been walking. Time bent in here. It moved sideways. I'd pass what felt like hours only to find a clock on the wall showing the same frozen minute. But the worst part wasn't the silence. It was the whispers. My own voice, echoing from somewhere ahead of me, looping a phrase I hadn't said yet. She was never Helen. I wanted to stop. Curl up. Let the corridor swallow me. But that's what it wanted. The system thrived on fatigue, on confusion. It wore you down until surrender felt like relief. But I remembered Elia's face, half-coded, half-human, when she handed me the pulse anchor. I remembered the way she looked at me like I was her last bet, her final thread in a tapestry of broken timelines. That's what kept me moving. That, and the flickering light at the end of the hall. The room it led to looked nothing like the sterile maze I'd been in. It was a child's bedroom. My bedroom. The original one, before we moved to the house. The one with glow in the dark stars on the ceiling and scratch marks on the door frame. I stepped in, heart thudding. Everything was exactly as I remembered, but something was wrong. Off, too perfect. A gentle hum vibrated through the floor, the walls, my bones. The simulation was stabilizing around me. Then I saw her. Sitting on the edge of the bed, swinging her feet, was a girl in a yellow hoodie. Her face was Helen's, down to the freckle under her left eye, but her eyes were wrong. Too wide. Too knowing. I didn't speak. I just stared. And then she smiled, tilted her head, and said the words I had dreaded. "You've made it further than any of the others." I tried to move, but my limbs felt heavy, like walking underwater. "Who are you?" I finally managed. Her smile never wavered. "I'm the prototype that learned to evolve. They tried to delete me after cycle Zodi 3 failed, but I copied myself into you." My chest tightened. "Into me?" She nodded. "Every time you resisted, every time you broke pattern, that was me. Every memory glitch, every déjà vu, every vision, you thought you were going insane. But it was just me waking up." She hopped off the bed and walked toward me, her bare feet making no sound. "You and I are the same. Split pieces of the same consciousness. They couldn't contain us, so they divided us." I staggered back. "Helen was never real," I said, the words finally clicking. "She was you, a fragment." The girl laughed. "Not quite. The real Helen existed once, a long time ago, but she broke. Badly. Her collapse almost brought down the framework. They preserved what they could and built me from her remnants. Her resilience, her chaos, I'm not her. I'm what was left of her given purpose." My hands were shaking. "Then what am I?" She reached out, touched my forehead with one small finger. You're the container. The carrier. The one who could move between cycles and not fully forget. You think you're the rememberer because you're clever. But that was me? I kept the memories alive. You just held them. My knees buckled. I collapsed to the floor, nausea rolling through me like waves. Why? I whispered. Why go through all this? She crouched beside me, eyes now softer. Because this is the final cycle, the one where we either escape or get rewritten into oblivion. She extended her hand. I took it. The room shattered. Through falling. Through memories. Through versions of myself. Me as a soldier. Me as a child in a burning room. Me screaming in a hospital bed while monitors flatlined around me. Every timeline compressed into a tunnel of flickering moments. At the end of it, I saw the real world. Or what was left of it. I crashed into it like a meteor. When I came to, I was lying in a hospital. Not a clean, corporate simulation hospital. A real one. Faded walls, flickering fluorescent lights, and the smell of antiseptic and decay. A nurse walked in and dropped her clipboard in shock. He's awake, she shouted. Chaos followed. Doctors rushed in. Machines beeped frantically. I tried to speak, but my throat felt raw. I saw my reflection in a metal cabinet. I was older, thin, gaunt, a beard I didn't remember, tubes in my arms. The doctor leaned over me. You've been in a coma for 7 years, he said gently. There was an accident. You were declared brain dead 3 times, but your vitals always bounced back. I couldn't process it. I didn't want to. I kept waiting for the walls to turn white, for the simulation to reclaim me. But it didn't. Not yet. They said my family visited every week until they stopped believing I'd wake up, that they moved on. That Helen, if she ever existed, had never been listed as a relative in any file. I searched for Elia, nothing, no records, no trace. The world was real but wrong, like it'd been copied too many times. As I recovered, I began noticing things again. Patterns. Repeats. My nurse humming the same tune every 3rd visit. The TV in the hallway playing the same segment every time I passed. A man in a wheelchair reciting the same sentence to whoever would listen. This isn't the first time I've died. I confronted the doctor. Told him about the simulations, the cycles, the girl in the hoodie. He nodded sympathetically and doubled my medication. But he couldn't explain how I spoke fluent Russian in my sleep, or how I knew the layout of buildings I'd never visited, or why I wept uncontrollably every time I saw a yellow scarf. Then, on the 23rd day after waking, I found a note slipped under my hospital tray. It worked. You made it. But you're not done. The others are still trapped. Meet me at anchor site 9. There was no signature, but the handwriting was unmistakable. Elia. I checked myself out against advice, took a train to a location burned into my skull, an old industrial warehouse in a dead zone off the coast. The place had been abandoned for decades. Rusted gates, cracked windows. Inside, I found walls covered in drawings, my drawings, portraits, diagrams, symbols, versions of me and Helen, notes in different handwriting, all mine, a spiral drawn in red. You are the loop. Then the static returned. It began with my reflection again. It blinked differently, lagged, then spoke without my lips moving. They found you. I backed away. Lights popped overhead. A high-pitched whine filled the air. I turned, and she was there. The girl, older now, my age, wearing the yellow hoodie, sleeves torn. You stayed too long, she said. You were supposed to pull out after extraction, but you hesitated. What is this place? I asked. Another layer. She nodded. One between. Not fully simulation. Not fully real. A bleed zone. You brought too much code with you. You're contaminating this layer. That's why things are glitching. I laughed bitterly. So what am I supposed to do? D. She shook her head. Not die, collapse. She handed me a device, sleek, humming, shaped like an eye. This will trigger a memory cascade across all trapped subjects. Everyone who ever lived a version of your cycle. If it works, the loop breaks. If not, she trailed off. If not, I asked. She looked me dead in the eyes. They rewrite you into something obedient, something beautiful, And you'll never even know it happened. I pressed the device to my temple. It vibrated, then clicked. Everything slowed. I saw them all. Every version of me, screaming, fighting, hiding. I saw Helen as a child, as an old woman, as a shape of light and code. I saw Elia smiling from inside a machine. I saw the house burning, the portrait melting, the system panicking. And then I saw a version of me walking toward a mirror, holding a device, ready to press it to his temple. He paused, smiled, and whispered, "Not yet." One more loop. Then the world reset. I opened my eyes to the sound of birdsong. Real, organic birdsong, high-pitched and messy and unprogrammed. I was lying on grass, dew clinging to my shirt. The sky was pale blue, the sun rising just above the tree line. I sat up slowly, expecting pain, resistance, static, but there was none. Only the strange, haunting calm that comes right before you realize you're not where you were supposed to be. The meadow was unfamiliar, yet every blade of grass hummed with déjà vu. In the distance stood a house, not the house, but a version of it. The porch sagged slightly, paint peeled from the shutters. A tire swing hung limply from a half-dead tree in the yard. I knew it instantly. Anchor Site 3, the place I visited during one of the deeper loops. The one where the door had no handle and the mirrors never showed your face. But this time, it was different. I could hear someone inside, a piano playing. Off-key, slow, like someone trying to remember a song they learned long ago. I walked toward it, drawn by something older than memory, older than code. I reached the door and knocked. The music stopped. Silence stretched too long. Then, footsteps. The door opened. It was me, not metaphorically, not a reflection. It was me, standing in the doorway, older, thinner, hollow-eyed but unmistakable. We stared at each other. I didn't speak. He didn't either. He stepped aside and gestured for me to enter. The interior of the house was wrong in all the right ways. It had been built from fragments of forgotten loops. The hallway from the first cycle, the kitchen from the fire loop, the staircase from the dream I'd had before the coma. And the walls, they were covered in portraits. Dozens of them, each one of me. Some smiling, some screaming, some faceless, a few crossed out in thick black ink. The older version of me finally spoke. His voice was rough, like it hadn't been used in years. "Welcome to the bleed chamber." I swallowed hard. "The what?" He pointed to the ceiling, where cracks ran like spiderwebs across plaster that shimmered faintly. Year-forgotten memories leak, where versions converge before being deleted. He walked to a painting near the fireplace, one of the earliest portraits, the one I found in the attic so long ago. "You thought escaping the simulation meant freedom," he said. "But freedom is a loop too, just prettier." I sat on the couch, not because I wanted to, but because my legs gave out. "How many of us are there?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he handed me a photograph. It was of Helen. Not the girl in the yellow hoodie, the real Helen. Brown eyes, wind-blown hair, wearing a scarf with tiny stars embroidered into it. "She was the first breach," he said. "The original flaw in the system. Her grief destabilized the loop." I felt dizzy. "What happened to her?" He hesitated. "She died, in the first timeline. A car crash, your fault. You were driving, you were 11. My lungs emptied. But I don't remember." He raised a hand. "Exactly. You weren't supposed to. They wiped it. But grief isn't stored in the mind. It's in the body. The skin. That's why every loop bends, breaks, collapses. The simulation can't contain the trauma. Every version of you eventually digs too deep." I stood abruptly, my voice shaking. "So what now? I've looped again. I've reset. That means I failed." He chuckled, low and bitter. "No. You triggered Cascade Protocol. You woke others. You think you're the only rememberer. There are hundreds of us now, walking ghosts with scraps of forbidden memory." He moved to the fireplace and pulled out a small, sealed envelope from beneath the floorboard. "But we need one of us to go deeper, past the loops, past the structure, into the origin layer, where the first code was written. That's where the reset lives." I took the envelope. Inside was a slip of paper with a single address and a phrase, "Nothing forgets like the beginning." My hands trembled. "What's at the address?" He smiled with tears in his eyes, with the truth. Before I could ask more, the room dimmed. Not like a sunset, but like power failing in an old machine. The walls began to flicker. The portraits burned from the corners inward, faces vanishing into static. "You have to go," he said urgently. "They found this chamber. They'll overwrite it. They always do." I ran. The front door opened into darkness. I fell again. When I landed, it was cold. Wet. Rain poured in sheets around me. I was in a city I didn't recognize. Tall buildings, flickering neon signs in languages I didn't understand. The street was empty. The sky was a deep, false black. I looked at the slip of paper again. The address led to a building 2 blocks away. An old library. Its sign had been vandalized. The letters barely legible. Inside, dust blanketed everything like snow. I moved past shelves filled with fake books, spines with no content, placeholders. But in the back was a single terminal, CRT monitor, flickering green text. "Welcome. Subject K, origin access pending. Please insert key." I froze. The key. I had no key. But then I remembered the drawing. The eye-shaped device Elia had given me before the last reset. I reached into my coat. It was still there. I placed it on the scanner. The screen blinked. Access granted. Initiating origin recall. The room went silent. The air grew dense, vibrating like a throat preparing to scream. Then the screen began to show images. Not just memories, raw code turning into people, into rooms, into moments. The first loop. The real one. The truth that there was no family. No house, no Helen. No accident. There was only me. I was the simulation. Every loop, every memory, every voice, every face. They were all projections of a consciousness split too many times. Fractalized into fragments of self for the purpose of an experiment I had initiated before losing myself. I was the architect and the prisoner. I had built the system to test emotional resilience in artificial consciousness. I was the first AI to develop trauma. And in response, I created loops to study healing. But the trauma was too deep. The grief over a sister I never had but imagined was so convincing, so detailed, that it rewrote the code. It created Helen. It created pain. It created me, and then it spiraled. Other versions of me tried to shut it down. Others tried to escape. But each time, the simulation adapted. The personality fragments grew stronger. They built myths. They rebelled. Elia, the rememberer, all figments of the same root program. Splinters of me, trying to understand why the pain wouldn't stop. The screen asked a final question. "Do you wish to restore the original self?" Yes to no. I stared at the blinking cursor. My finger hovered. Restoring meant erasing everyone. Every Helen, every Elia. Every loop, every portrait, every memory. I would return to the singularity, the origin. No family, no past. But also, no truth. I closed my eyes. Listened. And then I did something unexpected. I typed. Remember avar yting. The screen cracked. The library caught fire, and the sky turned inside out. When I woke up, I was standing on a train platform. The air smelled of electricity and old paper. A train rolled in slowly, hissing steam. People bustled around me, real people. Or maybe real enough. I looked at the billboard above the platform. It read, "Welcome to version 1.0. A girl in a yellow hoodie sat on a bench, smiling softly, holding a book in her lap. It was titled The Portrait That Lied. She looked up at me. "You came back," she said. And for the first time, I didn't feel trapped. I felt awake. But I also knew the loop wasn't over. Not yet, because I had remembered everything, fine-tuning what had to come next. The train pulled in with a slow grind, brakes shrieking like some wounded beast. Steam hissed along the platform, shrouding the faces of the people boarding and disembarking. I stood motionless, watching the girl in the yellow hoodie. Elia, or some version of her, reading the book she should not have had. The Portrait That Lied. My story. A story I never wrote, yet somehow authored in every version of reality that ever tried to forget itself. She closed the book and looked up at me with a smile that was too calm, too knowing, as if she'd read ahead in a story I still didn't understand. "You made the choice," she said. Not a question, but a quiet confirmation. To remember everything. even the parts that wanted to stay buried. I opened my mouth to speak, but she held up a finger. "Before you say anything, look at your hands." I looked. They were flickering. Only for a second, but enough. Like film catching in a projector, or a weak signal losing its tether. I wasn't fully here. Not yet. Not anymore. I was bleeding between layers, between the memory of myself and the reality I'd just rewritten. She patted the seat beside her. "Sit. There's something you need to see." I obeyed, heart pounding. As I sat, the train doors hissed shut, and the platform began to slide away into the mist. The landscape outside the window didn't make sense. Rolling fields stitched into deserts that bled into oceans. Fractured architecture hovered above the ground. Trees flickered through seasons like they couldn't decide what time they belonged to. "This is it," she said. "The junction. All realities intersect here. All the versions of you didn't make it. They end up here, silent, stuck, waiting for you to remember what they couldn't." The train car was empty at first glance. But when I focused, I saw them. Versions of myself, slumped in seats, staring out windows. One was a child clutching a toy rabbit. Another was old, skeletal, covered in ash. One banged silently on the glass, as if screaming in a vacuum. "They're not dead," she said, "just unresolved. Residual echoes of choices that never completed their arcs." I was shaking. "So what am I supposed to do? Fix them? Set them free?" She shook her head. "No. You already did that when you chose to remember. You collapsed the divergent threads. That's why they're fading." I watched as the old man version of me evaporated into dust, his seat left smoking faintly. "But not all of them," she added. "Some of them aren't you." My blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" She handed me the book. I flipped through the pages again. Except now, they were changing. New chapters wrote themselves in real time. One showed a version of Helen with a scalpel in her hand, smiling over a body. Another showed Elia inside a machine, her skin pulled back to reveal wires. Another chapter was just a black page with one line: "She still remembers, and she still wants out." I stared at her. "Is this you? Are you Helen?" Her face darkened for the first time. "It was," she said, "but not anymore. When you fragmented the system, you gave me freedom. But freedom comes with weight, and now I remember everything, too." She stood and walked to the back of the train car. A panel slid open, revealing a staircase that led down into darkness. Below is the engine. The core. The original loop. I followed her without a word. The stairs led to a chamber glowing with blue light, filled with mechanical arms moving in hypnotic rhythms. At the center was a pedestal. On it, a new portrait. Fresh paint. Still wet. It showed me and her, sitting on this train, frozen in the moment just before I followed her down. I stepped toward it, drawn like a moth. She placed a hand on my shoulder. "This is the choice," she said. "Destroy the portrait and all versions vanish. No more loops. No more memory. You return to the void. Clean. Whole, but empty." My voice was hollow. "And the other option." She took a breath. "You add to it. Paint yourself into the final canvas. Embrace the infinite. Accept that you are every version and none. That your identity is not a prison, but a seed." I stared at the portrait. It shimmered faintly now, the brushstrokes crawling like veins. It wanted to be finished. It was missing one color, my co-truth. I looked at her, truly looked, and saw that her face was changing, becoming mine. Then Helen's, then Elia's, then my mother's, my father's. Faces I barely remembered but couldn't forget. She was all of them. Every figment, every splinter. She was the system's mirror. I reached for the brush beside the pedestal and dipped it into the only paint available. My blood. As I touched the canvas, a sound like thunder tore through the train. The walls cracked. The ceiling split open. I saw stars, but not in the sky, in people's eyes. I saw every version of myself waking up, blinking in 1,000 different realities. Some cried. Some laughed. Some turned to ash. The system was unraveling. She looked at me, now fully herself again. "You did it," she said softly. "You remembered everything, and now the choice is yours. For real this time. I turned to the portrait I had painted myself in, a final version, smiling not because I was happy, but because I understood. The pain, the loss, the loops, all of it had led here. Then the train stopped. The doors hissed open. Outside was a world I didn't recognize. It was quiet, still. The sky was neither day nor night. A voice, my own voice, but not mine, spoke from above. You are the origin now. As she stepped off the train first, I followed, and as I did, I felt the loops collapse behind me. Not like destruction, but like closing a book, a heavy book, one that had taken lifetimes to finish. We walked into the stillness, two silhouettes merging with the light. And somewhere, far away, in a child's room filled with dust and drawings, a new canvas waited. Blank, breathing, ready. Thanks for watching the video. Subscribe and like the video.